Welcome to Net Positive, where we help you to transform your eco-anxiety into action through regeneration and resilience. How do we shift from seeing reuse as an inconvenience to making it a profitable and scalable solution? In today's episode, we're joined by Larry LaMotte, an architectural designer with the heart of an entrepreneur, bringing decades of experience in architectural design, residential construction, remodeling, and facilities management. Larry has started 7 businesses, sold 1, and even built an alumni organization. His latest venture, Recapture It, is the culmination of his work, tackling the challenge of building material reuse at scale. Living in the Pacific Northwest with his wife for nearly 40 years, Larry is an avid road and mountain cyclist with a goal to live to 120 years with vitality and strength. Today's episode's key takeaways are why reuse is a business opportunity and not just an environmental solution, the ability to make a decision with the information you have, and practical steps individuals and businesses can take to push past failure, how to endure hardships, and how to find fun. Hint, there is no backdoor solution. This conversation is for entrepreneurs, builders, architects, and anyone passionate about making reuse a core part of a regenerative economy. Hey, Larry, welcome to Net Positive. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Richard. Thanks for having me here today. I really appreciate this. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. We've had a lot of conversations even preparing for today's call, and I've gotten to learn so much about your work and your life, and it's really interesting. I'm excited to unpack more.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you find it interesting. Life is quite interesting there, Richard.
I do. You've got a lot of great stories to tell. And one of my first questions here is about your experience as an architectural designer. Most architects I know want fresh, clean, brand new materials. Whatever popped into your mind to be an architect that starts with waste?
Well, that's a fine question, Richard. Starting with waste wasn't where I started, really. It was that it seemed to be just a natural occurrence along the way. I started in architecture in the late 80s and in a particularly challenging economic environment. And the unemployment rate where I went to school in Oregon was about 12% when I graduated because the lumber industry had essentially tanked. So it wasn't exactly the prime fodder for a budding young architect to begin his career. But I had put myself through architecture school as a waiter at nights. And so I relied on that until about 6 months after architecture school, and then got a job in architecture and earned a whopping 1/3 of what I earned as a waiter. So it was a rough start.
Yes.
And because of that economic environment, which was pervasive not only in Oregon, but partly into Seattle, where we moved to, I had a job in architecture doing design, and I and all the bottom rungs of the ladder of the firm were fired the week before Christmas one year. And well, it happens. And left out on the stoop to go find a job at Christmas time. And that didn't happen very well. And after visiting 32 firms in Seattle with a magazine portfolio and a fresh resume for everybody and talking to 32 hiring managers, there was nothing happening at the time. So I went and got a job as a waiter in a brand new hotel in the Hyatt Regency in Bellevue, Washington. And then not long after that, I got a job as a remodel carpenter because I wanted to learn actually how buildings fit together and how you construct them and how you take them apart.
Okay.
So I actually, in the process of that, I became, a pretty good carpenter. I ended up building our house in Seattle that we lived in for 27 years, I think. And along the way of that, in the remodeling world and in my facilities management and in design build, I was always the guys scrounging around the job site going like, hey, Where are you going with that? Are you throwing that away? Hey, let me have, you're not going to throw that door in the dumpster, are you?
Right.
What are you doing with all that stuff? And I'd say, throw it in my truck. And so I scavenged, collected, and accumulated quite a nice supply of wood, of doors, of old windows. I remodeled a garage first and made an apartment in it. And then I built a house and I incorporated used stuff into both. A lot of used things. And I would buy them. I would go out and actively buy these used things at auctions. This was prior to the online stuff, Facebook Marketplace and Nextdoor and Craigslist and all those. So I'd just go to auctions and things, and I'd go to job sites and I'd say, hey, are you throwing that away? Do you mind if I take that? Oh, take it. It's all yours. So I wasn't, the green guy. I just was like, why are you throwing that away? And fast forward along the career path to, about 2016 or so, when I did a career reinvention, I put together all the things that I could do well, that I was, somewhat talented in, that I enjoyed doing, and bundled them all together and created this thing that would become Recapture It. It embodied that whole, why are you throwing that stuff away mentality. And I met some people from the EPA at a conference, a build reuse conference, and I think it was 2017 or 2018. And these two women, we were talking about construction and demolition waste. And they said to me, so do you know what municipal waste is? And I knowingly nodded, of course not. No, tell me. Like, I don't know. I know the words. And they said, well, that's actually all the waste, all the garbage, all the trash that you and I and 330 million Americans throw away at home and at work and in recycling all year long. I'm like, oh, wow, that's a lot. Aren't we the worst in the world? Yes, we're the worst in the world. Okay. Then they looked at me and said, so where do you think that construction and demolition waste fits with that? I'm like, again, very knowledgeably, I don't know, 30, 40% has got to be a lot. It's huge, right? And they said, it's a whole nother category. I'm like, okay, so it's not over in this municipal waste thing. No, it's not there. It's another category. And one of them looks at me and she goes, and it's 2 times bigger.
Wow.
Wait, did I hear you right? 2 times bigger than all the stuff that we throw away at home and work all year long? It's 2 times bigger than that. They go, I'm like, why didn't I know that? Why don't we all know that? We're at a conference here. Why doesn't everybody know that? We're talking about plastic straws. Why are we?
You're shouting from the mountaintops.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's like the pimple on the butt of the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is 2 times bigger than all that municipal waste. Why aren't we talking about it? Why don't we know about that? And they look at each other and they're like, so if you want a moment of clarity as to purpose and intent of the future and, okay, here's what I'm going to go do, that was it. Because that just encapsulated the need for it. And that's when I really started digging into the whole global understanding of construction waste and the whole demolition versus deconstruction and looking at this very fractured mess of the way that it was processed now and the fraction of the total that we actually do process, either through recycling or reuse. And reuse is actually a very small percent. So that seemed like a pretty good entrepreneurial challenge. And I was kind of up for that because it was time to do something of the heart rather than just opportunistic. And so that really solidified that for me.
I want to come back to that, the heart aspect, but to not get us too far off the topic, right here at the top, what's one of your favorite materials you've recaptured or salvaged? What's one of those gobsmack moments you're like, why would you throw this away?
Yeah,
There's got to be plenty of those, but is there anything that really raises to your mind?
I'm kind of a fan of doors, so I've salvaged a lot of doors, but I think one of the most tactily tantalizing and the most aesthetically pleasing is the wood that was used in old buildings, 100 years ago or so. And the house that I took apart in Seattle, I took a little 800 square foot house, I raised it up 11 feet in the air, gutted it completely, built a new foundation, and made a whole new 1,820 square foot house out of it. In that, I found all this beautiful old wood, and in other projects where I'd accumulated these too. And when you clean it up and polish it up, it's just gorgeous, and it's denser, and it took longer to grow than the wood that we use in construction nowadays. And some of it, a lot of it just came out of the old growth that the lumbermen of old just took down and took for granted. And now we no longer can take that for granted. But that wood is beautiful. And I put one into a newel post, the post at the end of your stairway in our home in Seattle. And then there was another beam right over the top of that I'd extracted out of elsewhere. And people would look at that and they're like, wow, that's really interesting. It kind of looks beat up. It kind of is beat up. They're like,
kind of like 5 times as old as you.
Yeah, it's like, why is it all beat up? I'm like, because it's not new, because it came out of another house, because I am reusing it. And even then, when I built that into that house in Seattle, I wasn't thinking reuse. I wasn't thinking, it's greener. I was just thinking it's stupid to throw all that stuff away. So, yeah.
Well, and all that value, you've already mentioned a couple of the real strong criteria there of some of these older materials are so much way higher quality. Oftentimes, because the raw materials back then were available and plentiful.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's really cool. And there's a lot of storytelling there. I would imagine that when guests come over, it sounds like you left some of those architectural elements exposed so that you could talk about some of those stories. It makes for a really nice place to live when there's a lot of stories that come along there. And even to tell your guests.
I took the iron registers, the air vents. You get the ones at Home Depot and Lowe's and Menards and all that now, and they're little louvered things, and they weigh about as much as a dime. But these were not that. These were cast iron. They were ornate and so forth. Well, I'd taken those out of old houses, and so I got to put those into that house too. And people are like, "Well, that's pretty. I thought this was a new house."
Tell me about some of the beauty in those reclaimed materials.
Well, that is where a lot of the emotional aspect of reuse comes into play, is the embodied history, the aesthetics, the beauty that are embodied in the materials. And on our marketplace, on Recapture the marketplace online, we had to speak with sellers of salvage all over the world. And one of the more interesting ones was a $300,000 and some chandelier that came out of an old train station, and the thing's like 10 feet across. So there's these pieces of history that come out of buildings that so often are just literally toppled down, crushed, and thrown away. But if they are recognized for their value as they are, and extracted prior to taking the whole building down, or in the process of dismantling the building and deconstruction, then you can essentially save the value of those materials. And you get things that are ornate ironwork. You get beautiful, like I mentioned, chandeliers. You get the old wood that has this remarkable, beautiful, hard grain that you finish and expose so people can enjoy it. You take things out of a situation that, it had hard abuse, but that abuse has a story and has an aesthetic. And when you put it into a flooring, or you put it into a tabletop, then it's beautiful. And it's not that, well, we took a brand new piece of lumber and we hit it with a chain about 1,000 times, and then we hit it with a hammer a few times, and then we took a little torch and we burned it, and then we sanded it, and then we made it sort of look old, and we called it, distressed, which I've done, but it's not the same. It's just not the same. So there's so much. In fact, in our marketplace, we incorporated a feature we called the story of origin.
Ooh.
Which the originator of the material, the seller of the item, could put in the story of its origin. If it came out of an 1862 church in Philadelphia or something, it could be documented and put into the system to tell that story, because that taps into the emotional aspect of the longevity of the material, because now when it goes from one thing and it goes into another, then people are going to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about that old beam in our house. People talk about, well, these bricks came out of an 1862 church in Philadelphia that had to be dismantled because of the freeway coming through or whatever. And as a result, we got to put that into our beautiful townhouse here or whatever. And they get to tell that story, but there's value in that.
Mm-hmm.
And you can buy a dismantled brick for like pennies, or you can buy a brick that has the original brickmaker's hand stamp in it for like $7 a brick. So there's value in it. Yeah. And that aesthetic is something to capture. Now, you won't find that necessarily in the rudimentary stuff, the bricks, the 2x4s, and so forth, but that's okay. It's all part of the whole thing. Buildings are complex. There's a lot of stuff in them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're finding ways to reuse just about everything.
And my mental picture here is of that chandelier in the train station and how many thousands of footfalls traffic has been beneath that chandelier. It's provided light and guidance and visual warmth and navigation. There's a lot of useful and beautiful functions of that chandelier. And the fact that it gets to live again is something special there with its story. And it didn't get smushed when that building was collapsed.
No smushing.
Well, Larry, starting a business ain't easy, and you've done this quite a few times. Tell me about sort of the path that you took with your businesses, and not all of it has been successful. Tell me about where you may have fallen on your face, and what did you learn?
Wow. Well, there were numerous face plants, and I can't say that even in a fairly successful business, you don't face plant it. Occasionally, because you do. The first business I started in 1990, and I had a couple of partners in, a licensed architect, a contractor, and I was to be the developer, and we were going in to develop parts of the city of Seattle. And we bought a house right out of the gate, and I found that they were sort of on the job time clock in the way that they behaved in the business. And I'm like, yeah, 4 o'clock's not quitting time, boys. And so I, in my youthful haste, fired them and took it on myself. And I can't say that that was the most stellar decision, but it is what happened. And then I was saddled with a remodel project of a house, which I actually is the one that became the house that we lived in. We built it as a spec project, but we liked it, and we thought, well, we're going to stay. Mm-hmm. So here's what happened in that, though. In the midst of, we were living in the garage that I had made the apartment in. So we're in a little garage. We got a big dog. I've got a night job. My wife has a day job, and I'm building this house on our property, and you just can't get away from it. And at one point we got red tagged, meaning shut down by the city, and then reopened again with an apology. Then at one point, a stack of plywood slid over and pinned me up against the house and slammed my arm into the house. And I stopped 44 sheets of plywood from kind of dominoing over on me. And that knocked my hand off my arm bones.
Oh my gosh.
It dislocated my wrist. It broke 3 bones in there. And strangely as it might seem, I could no longer do construction. I couldn't do architecture because we barely had CAD in those days. And I couldn't even wait tables anymore because I'm right-handed.
You need all this dexterity.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, crap. But I did have that waiter job at night because I was, we had to pay the bills. And so they offered me a manager job. And I'm like, got my
with your arm stretched
here, this metal, it had 5 pins holding it all together. And I'm like, sign me up. It's my dream. And so I worked for them. Fortunately, it was a big restaurant company. They had beautiful restaurants in Seattle, picturesque waterfront properties and so forth. And I took, and after about a year and a half of management, I was like, I put a proposal to them saying, I'd like to take care of your buildings. I think I can do a better job of it than you do. you guys know how to run restaurants. You guys know how to make amazing food and all that. But taking care of your buildings, I think I can do a better job. And I put down an Excel spreadsheet in front of them. I said, here's what I think I can do. I can save you. Here's what I would like to earn. And they said, okay.
Wow.
I'm like, wait a minute. And then I'm thinking like, oh, crap, I didn't ask for enough money.
Wow.
I thought I was being quite bold, but evidently I wasn't. So I did that then for about 9 years and took care of a bunch of their restaurants. And I oversaw additions, remodels, and multi-million-dollar projects.
Yeah, they swap out furniture every 5, 6, 7 years sometimes.
Yeah. And out of that, I spun out a consulting company and that I had for 18 years and another company that was janitorial quality assurance called Clean Check that I had for 17 years. And that was the one I actually sold. And that, that spun out of doing that work in those restaurants and seeing the problems that they faced and coming up with business ideas to branch out of that. Because I just got that entrepreneurial bug. I've had it since I was a kid. I've had paper routes, since I was 8 to 13. I did farm work. I did pedicab, taxi service. I did singing telegrams. I sold Cutco knives. You name it, I did it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
You've hinted at this through our conversation so far, and this question has kind of a dual edge to it. Tell me about some of the garbage of your career. Tell me where things were trashy or messy and what got you over that hump.
Well, I'll tell you. Let's go back to that first business and even prior to the injury, but after the injury, surely, because I was out for a full year with that hand injury. So that thing just sat there, that house that stared at us while we lived in this cold little garage apartment. And I didn't have the EQ that I have developed and the environmental, the intellectual quotient. No, I don't mean the intellectual, the emotional quotient. The development,
the love, the heart, the spirit,
the development of the skills that help one through emotional situations of life. And so in the operation of building this house and having a job as a waiter and then injuring myself and having to endure through that and stare at that house every day and have about 5, 6, 7 credit cards all maxed out that we were trying to keep afloat. It was a very, very difficult time. I've never experienced depression in my life, but there were days when I would just literally sit on the floor of the garage. I'd be dressed. I'd even have a tool belt on it sometimes, and I couldn't even get up. I just couldn't get off the couch. And I say couldn't, and that's just so victim-y, so disempowered. But it was like, let's just say I didn't get off the couch. I'd just put on cartoons or watch, whatever, and just stare at the TV because I was so disheartened and really didn't know what to do. So how I solved that was 2 things. I thought, well, one, I knew that having a vision for something will always help you to go toward that, to have something to aim at. So I had the architectural drawings. Now, some of them weren't so evocative, but looking at the elevations, what the house will look like when it was done, I would stare at that and I would then imagine myself in that and I would walk through it and I would think, this is going to be awesome. And I would kind of invigorate myself with that. So envisioning and imagining, and I still do that to this day. It's very useful. The other thing was I went to bookstores and I sat I walked through the self-development aisles and I looked for whatever stood out to me. And this is just kind of woo-woo and creepy, but some of the most impactful books that I've ever read, just like, bing, just like stood out of the shelf and said, this is the one. And I'd pick it up and I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what I need. How did I spot that one? Well, that didn't just happen once. That's happened like 4 or 5 times. So, I'm sure it can be explained, and yet we don't have that
magic sometimes.
But going in and reading those books, and one of them I had to actually put a second cover on. It's so beaten up, and that was the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I read that over and over and over and over, and I read Dale Carnegie, and I read all these experts of old and new, and just learned how to better understand myself, how to better make better decisions, how to not get caught up in the emotions of things, and so forth and so on. And that was my starting point to a career of parallel self-development, professional development until today. In fact, I read every morning, I journal, I take classes. I just finished a course a 6-week course just about 2 weeks ago. So all that became ingrained from that time back in the mid 90s, when I was enduring depression and difficulties and injury and debt and
Your wife yelling at you because it's not done yet? That seems...
yeah, she would come home and well, that was it. Yeah, she'd come home and she'd look and she'd go, well, is that all
What did you
got?
do all day?
Is that all you got done? Well, speaking of garbage of the ventures, that little house, it was 840 square foot house that we bought, pulled off siding. I climbed up in the attic. I crawled into the crawl space. I looked at everything that I could before we bought it. It was those spaces, the floor framing that I could see from the crawl space, the roof framing that I could see from up in the attic, and where I pulled off the siding to look at the underlayment under there. All those places were fine, and that's it. Everywhere else, I found, where you would have studs that go all the way down to the floor. Well, that's what they're supposed to do. Oh, we got one here that's kind of cut off, and they tacked like a dining room table leg onto that with one nail. It's like, oh, that's good enough. Where they expanded out and built a room out, and they cut off all the studs, so now they're just hanging in the air. Well, normally you would put a beam under there to hold them up. No, they didn't do that. They used old, that crappy old 1/8-inch thick old paneling that you would see in the 70s, that dark, kind of fakey looking paneling. Well, that's what they used to hold all that up. So I'm pulling that off, expecting to see a nice, 4x6, big, sturdy thing under there. There's nothing. I'm like, oops. So I had to put another one. Every day that my wife came home, I had encountered some other abuse of the construction of that house, some other anomaly of horrible nature that I had to fix. And I literally got to keep the one corner of the house for its stable construction, and the rest had to all be rebuilt. So, yeah, that's some garbage along the way. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of gems here, and one of them was kind of our learning point here, which is making decisions without enough information. Give me some more, unpack that a little about how you've been able to make decisions and stay fluid and pivot when you may not have all the bits and pieces, like uncovering structural members that don't reach the floor. Tell me some ways that you've had to push forward without a full set of information.
Yeah. Well, time is an asset that we have in limited quantity, and sometimes we feel like we have it in unlimited quantity. But as time slips by, money slips out. And so if one is prone to making decisions slowly and needing to have everything answered and all the answers and check all the boxes and so forth, statistics show very clearly that doesn't necessarily make any better decision. So I have come to understand the guidance of people like Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson and other amazing entrepreneurs who have done things, and they decide quickly, they act quickly, they are action prone, and I had to learn that, and that took some time, but I've been very conscious and conscientious about inputting habits into place that are beneficial, and that's one of them, that make decisions quickly based on, let's just say, adequate information, and don't, we'll just spend another week. I think I've got another trail to ask some more things about over here. No. Once you have, 60, 70% of it answered, chances are darn good you're going to be able to make an accurate decision, as good as you would if you went down the path much, much, much farther. So having that action-prone attitude and the ability to make decisions is a really good thing. So
and I think the more that you practice those decision-making skills, the more, at least in my personal life, I realize that they're not always permanent decisions. I can pivot or change direction later down the road, but
yeah,
something needs to be decided now so you can move forward.
yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your job and how you've overcome barriers in material reuse and even unlocked profitability in that sector. So despite clear economical and environmental benefits of reuse, what have been some of the challenges you've faced with making this a mainstream practice?
So thank you for asking that in that way. And I can't actually say that we have made it a mainstream practice yet. That is actually the goal. So we built an online marketplace through the years of COVID, looking first for a web development company that built marketplaces back in like 2018. Well, there weren't that many. And I shopped literally all over the world. And we found a company that actually did a very nice job of it in India. And that's the one we went with. What we didn't know then was that they do a great off-the-rack marketplace, and I could buy one for $1,000. Couldn't modify it much, but I bought one, and I worked through all 5 of their manuals, so I could actually know how to operate one. So I went through the seller, the buyer, the administrator, and so forth, and learned how to use it. And then it's like, okay, now we're going to pull the trigger with this one. Yet the challenge that used materials have is that everything is basically unique.
Yeah, the 2 doors are going to be the same. They have the same rough dimensions.
They could have been the same when they got put into, let's say, the house in, 50, 60, 80 years ago. They aren't the same now.
Hinge pockets will be in different places.
Yep.
Some have frames, some don't.
Exactly. Some are, well worn and abused and have 7 layers of paint on them. Some of them are in pristine condition in some closet that never got opened, right? So there's all of that. And that made the complexity of the marketplace much greater because now I tell people, hey, this is not T-shirts and shoes. It doesn't come with a barcode. You got to identify it. And here was a challenge that we had to overcome, is that in order to actually sell something online, to actually complete the transaction like everybody does on Amazon all day long, everywhere, you actually had to have the weight and the dimensions of the item. Because again, it's not shoes and T-shirts. It's things that are long and short and tiny and truckloads and, so forth. With that in mind, we had to bring into the industry something that they didn't yet have to do. Because they weren't doing, the sellers of architectural salvage and used building materials that were out there, the retailers, and there's about 2,000 around the country, they weren't doing that, generally speaking, because that's a lot more work. Well, that's what it would take to do an online transaction. So we actually had a young woman go around part of America in a van and help people to start that up. And we spent hours and hours and hours helping our sellers set up so that they could measure and weigh and then put that information into the system so that you would actually get the shipping calculated so you could actually do the transaction online. So you, just like on Amazon, you click, I want that door. It's going to be this much. Here's the tax. Here's the shipping. And here's how long it's going to take. And click buy. Well, if you're just used to selling on Craigslist, that means that you can put up one sort of kind of, a picture. You can call it a picture. It may be a door in a field, And all it is to entice somebody to come in to the store. Well, now you're not going into the store. You are buying online. So now we had to help people understand you got to put a lot more nicer pictures on so that they accurately convey what it is, because you don't want surprises. If it has flaws, show them. If it has 6 sides, show them. And they're like, well, that's a lot more work.
In
Like,
detail, no less. No,
yes,
no
it
blurry
is.
pictures. I want to scour this thing.
Right. It's a lot more work, but the other advantage is that you get a lot more audience. You get
Tell me about that audience. How is this new model aimed at professionals and commercial enterprises? Have you found new customers?
okay. So you are shifting there, Richard, into our new model of distribution of recaptured building materials. So we are actually
Let's stay in the old model and take me
okay.
through that journey, if you would.
Yeah. So the old model, we were dealing with salvage sellers, existing retailers,
Mm-hmm.
which have Habitat for Humanity is probably their restores is probably the most commonly known, and I think they have about 900 around the country. They've got a lot of them. Okay, well, second to that is a fraction of that. So, like I said, we've only found about 2,000 around the country, but they're kind of a combination warehouse. So they're sort of a warehouse. They process the materials, they store them, and they sell them. And then as the internet became available, then they started to, let's call it bolt-on technology, but everybody was doing it differently. You got the proverbial 16-year-old friend of your son who's building your website, or you've got a very nice, sophisticated Shopify site. So they mix of technology. Some have like zero technology. They're still using carbon copies and a spindle. Okay. I'm not kidding. And a great percentage of salvage sellers, this is no diss on them because it's efficient. They just use masking tape and a Sharpie. They've got a board and here's what we sell stuff for. And they look at it and it's like, okay, put the tape on, get the Sharpie out, write, $73 and off it goes into the store. That's the way it works because they weren't selling online. We're selling online. So that needed a whole new paradigm, a whole new model of operation. So we encountered that as a considerable hindrance to them, but we got it down to a science, really, and we got it accelerated to where they could do it quite efficiently, and then they could choose which materials they wanted to put on. Then the other challenge came up. Okay, well, I've put a whole bunch of stuff into a website already. I don't want to have to input all those individually into your marketplace website. And we'd say, well, you can put it into this CSV file, which is an Excel spreadsheet. So you take it out of yours, you put it into ours, but then, okay, but you still got to get all those dimensions and weight in so they can actually sell it online. So that was a big, hairy, thorny challenge. So anyway, we learned a lot of lessons through that. We also had to go through the whole COVID thing and have our development company shut down in India and blah, blah, blah. And we missed the greatest surge of remodeling ever in American history, which happened during COVID when nobody could go anywhere and they all just remodeled their homes. So we missed that too. But again, we learned a lot of lessons and now we're pivoting. We have pivoted and we're taking a different approach. And shall I continue on that one, Rich?
Tell me about this pivot.
Yeah. So because the residential market and the salvage sellers, it's buyers and sellers. So the sellers are the salvage stores, and they do a remarkable job, and they have done a remarkable job, and they are, they're working diligently. They're serving largely residential audience, so homeowners, and some small scale designers and so forth that are inputting them into what a friend calls cameo roles, which is like, you'll see the aesthetic adornment of a beautiful old mahogany bar from some ancient hotel in a brand new hotel. Well, that's reuse. Or you'll see that corrugated metal on the surface of a restaurant or something on their walls or something like that. But that's all sort of the cameo roles. It's just the aesthetic stuff. But that's the sad truth of all of the activity that all these people that are working so hard to do what they're doing and doing well at it is accomplishing is less than 15% of the actual volume of materials that is going to the dump. So that means 85% is still going to the dump.
That hits your brain and feel good.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good, but it's the darn truth. And it's we just don't see it. It just gets whisked away in trucks. It gets into dumpsters. It's all very efficient. And so we just don't see it. And that's why we talk about plastic straws, because we see them, we feel them, we touch them. But fact of the matter is the elephant in the room versus the pimple on the elephant's behind is construction and demolition waste. And it's massive, but it's like a mystery. It's out
invisible.
there quietly being, well, not so quietly because it's dumpsters and stuff, but it's going to the dump. So that's what we're tackling now. So we're going to a different audience and we're going through a different mechanism. And that is to embrace channels of distribution, which is ways to sell stuff. So that's like recapture its marketplace. It's also like eBay and Amazon. Then technology. There is so much amazing technology out there. Like you can take your phone and take a picture of something and it will identify it and go, that's a door, that's a chair, that's a stereo, that's a speaker, and okay, well, that's pretty cool. And then it can actually input information very quickly, faster than a human being into an inventory management system, which is another aspect of technology that we're incorporating now, which is inventory management, again, to facilitate that quick input of materials into eBay and Etsy and a Shopify site and recapture it and QuickBooks and all these other technologies. Well, when it's in one and it's all identified, then that can happen. If it's got masking tape and a Sharpie on it and it's sitting in a warehouse, that can't. So that technology is a key ingredient, and then storage. So we're not doing the retail model where you've got retail hours and you've got, Joe's working the cash register, then the forklift, and then he's got to go over and take pictures of things. And meanwhile, Jane's back at the cash register and she's going to help come take pictures of things and put it on the internet. And then, back to the cash register and back to the forklift and whatever, right? Well, so we will be having larger scale processing facilities in which you can process huge amounts of materials from all the sources and mark them, give them each a unique identifier. And this is a magical thing. This is like a barcode or a QR code so that they can be scanned. And now you know what inventory you have. Now it can be put into all your systems. Now it can be put into online things. And now it can be made available to the architecture, engineering, and construction community to go into their software so that they can actually specify these things for purchasing. So that architects can look at materials in parallel with new materials and compare the two and go like, why would we not go with these? Right. So that can't happen now. But when we treat materials from used material sources and from surplus as though they were the raw materials to make new materials, it's just a parallel. You've got raw materials, which are virgin materials that go into new materials. Or you've got raw materials, which are used, and surplus materials that get remanufactured and identified and become essentially newly remanufactured materials in parallel. So when they're equivalent, side by side, it's like going to an auto supply store where they have remanufactured parts. So you need a new transmission for your car. Well, you can get the brand new OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, or you can get a remanufactured one at a fraction of the price. It's like half or 60% of the price. I'm going to go with a remanufactured car because remanufactured part because my car's, it's going to be fine. Well, we're doing the same darn thing, and now we're making it available to a much bigger audience than that residential audience that is largely self-satisfied. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell. The channels of distribution and selling, and the technology that's available and we can now utilize to make things a lot faster, and the storage and processing facilities at scale that are wholesale and not retail.
And my mind has been exploring while you've been telling this story too. And I would imagine that the digital capture is both modular, but also upgradable. And what I mean by this is I can see in my mind's eye a top mount camera, and you place your door down on the platen and it shoots photos. Flip it over, you shoot photos of the other side. But it's not that far of a leap to 3D scan it at that point.
Nope.
You blast out some IR dots and the camera receives that. It knows the depth data. Our phones do this now.
Yeah.
So I would imagine it's a quick step into a digital file that contains not only dimensions, but also topography. If it's a 6-panel door, you can see the 6 panels, you know what dimensions it are. And then you could drop it into your CAD programs. As you mentioned, you didn't have CAD way back when, but now we have some magic at our fingertips.
And we have BIM software, building information management software, that you can put in three-dimensional things called a digital twin of the item, and then they can move it around in the drawing on the computer and put it in place, and then it just locks into place. Well, here's the door, and that's where it goes. Brilliant. And so we can carry a digital twin image in our inventory management system that can go into these systems of AutoCAD and so forth that are out there and used by architects and designers.
Yeah, that data just comes along with the file now.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking about your business, and tell me how you've talked about some of the network that you've worked with and have built over time, but for businesses and individuals who want to integrate reuse into their work, what's one of the best first steps that they can take?
So individuals, I told you a little bit about what I did. I was just like, where are you going with that? What are you doing with that? And it's sort of, it's sort of just a mindfulness about, as you're about to throw something away, well, what can I do with it? And we have a big, giant plastic bin down in our basement that we throw in, we call it the Goodwill bin, and okay, well, there's one. And it's got clothes and electronics and, little furniture things and stuff, right, that we're not going to use anymore, but it's got value left in it instead of throwing it away. So people do that already. And Goodwill and Salvation Army and others are really good at that. And that's at the individual level. I mean, I can't say that everybody can do what I do. And the guy that takes care of our lawn calls my basement the Home Depot because everything's all organized. I've got plumbing over here, electrical over here, and so forth. So labels, hardware. It's like, it's so anytime we got to fix something or build something, we just go down there and grab it. And to date, we've never actually had to go to the store to get anything to fix anything. So, and I've just collected that over the years. It's extras, it's surplus, it's things that I've torn out and reused. So I kind of lived the life of it. I built a gym in our garage in a room that's attached, that's part of the garage. And we took paint from the shelves down in the basement that were left when we purchased the house. And I mixed a color out of old paints. They were all latex. I mixed a color out of them that we liked. And then I filtered it through like an old nylons, or something, and made about a gallon of paint. We had enough paint then out of the old supply to paint the old gym a couple of coats. Well, there's reuse right there. And there are paint reuse places around the country too. So that's a big, big, big savings of waste that can happen by reusing paint. And then for businesses, there are remarkably gifted, smart sustainability experts that are out there that can come in and they can tell you how to structure your recycling program so that people understand it and use it, as opposed to like you're coming out of a sports event, you've been to a football game or something, and you come out and you look at the bins there, and you've got a cup with a plastic lid and a straw on it, and you got a wrapper and you got a napkin, and you're like, where does it go? And people are pushing by you, and you're like, which one does it go in? And confusion is the killer of recycling. And recycling is not as good as reuse. But so we gotta do things to make it simpler. So in the world of business, you can do that, and you could make it simpler so people actually understand exactly what is to go where and channel things into there so that they get reused or recycled as opposed to thrown away. And it's not that complicated, and it's really not that expensive to have that happen. So that's part of it. And then on the construction job sites, well, that's what we're working on. Construction, demolition sites, deconstruction. Deconstruction is dismantling of buildings as opposed to knocking them down. And then there's a hybrid kind of in the middle where you deconstruct some of it and demolish some of it. So there's that. That's a big thing. I can't really say I have any advice for, the Joe and Jane on the street to do, but for those that would be interested in what we're doing, we're certainly available to talk to them about that. We're going city to city, working on a regional basis now, helping to take this concept of those three elements I told you about, the big processing, the technology, and the channels of distribution. We're consulting with them to help them, guide them, and using that conceptual model of those three elements, but doing it specifically for that region because every region, every city is like a fingerprint. You can't do the same thing you did in Palo Alto, California, which is a very, very affluent community, that you do in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is at the opposite end of the scale. You can't do the same thing or it will fail. And that's a whole nother topic. Policy.
That's a whole nother topic.
That's a whole nother topic. But
how are we doing on time, Larry? How are you for time?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. This is a really interesting conversation.
Okay. Well,
so I want to transition us to our next segment here. It's called the community garden. And have you ever used the rose, thorn, bud conversation framework before?
I have seen it in action, but I have never used it until you told me about it.
Oh, great. Well, we're going to practice here. Just a quick reminder, rose is something that's really blossoming in your world these days, that's current and present, that's positive or inspiring, that you've observed in your work or your life. A thorn is a challenge. You've mentioned a few of them in today's conversation, but something, a prickly problem that brings blood to your fingertips that we could help to work on. It could come from anxiety or fear, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to do next, not to see your response there, but a problem that we can support you with. And a bud is hope for the future, given enough sunlight and warmth, is an opportunity that's out on the horizon that will turn into something amazing. So, Larry, tell me about what's really blossoming in your world. What's fragrant?
May I start with the bud first?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So
when you look through your lens out at the horizon, given enough sunlight and warmth, what's something that you see in the future?
So I'm a positivist or an optimist, I think. I don't know which, but I'm a pretty positive guy. I like to find the silver linings in all situations. In our current economic situation, I look at these proposed tariffs and the bickering and dickering that's going on with that. And I think, you know what? Hey, for used, there are no tariffs. It's already here.
Already here. It's already made.
That makes them much more competitive. So that's a bonus. They're also regional, locally accessible. So you don't have the supply chain issues and carbon footprint for traveling as far and so forth. So that's a bonus. And one thing that I think of is budding is that there is so much technology, and that's a broad term, but I'd use that for everything from a nail-pulling robotic machine made by Urban Machine in Oakland, California.
I've seen that.
To a company in Toronto, in Ontario, Canada, that their name is Adaptus, and they are building brilliant sustainability-focused technology for the architecture, engineering, and consulting community in carbon footprint analysis, prediction, and so forth, so you can understand what material use implies in your building of the future or in how to operate it better currently. And there's a myriad of things all around the world that I'm aware of and others are aware of, but most people aren't. And to pull those technologies together and not work in our little silos and our little caves and hide it all from everybody else, and to pull them together and in this harmony, I think we've solved 95% of our human-caused maladies. We've already solved them. We just don't know they're there necessarily, and we haven't put them together in a way that makes it work as a system as opposed to a bunch of disparate parts. It's like, well, I got this fuel injector. Well, we've got a tire. Great. You need a car. What's the car, right? So we're working on that holistic solution, the car kind of a model, as opposed to just, we're pulling in the brilliant makers of the tires and the doors and the seats and the engine and all the stuff and pulling them all together. That's what our expertise is really finding a home in. So that's the bud. So I really think that we're on the tipping point of making some really great progress in all of that, and that the technologies are there. We just have to get them into place. Just have to get them into place, and to merge them into the entrenched systems that are already in place in operation. And we do so because we're making reuse profitable. And we're not
key, right?
Yeah, that's a key. It's all commerce. So that's the stuff that actually makes it work. And that's the thing that developers respond to when you're not costing them money, or when a policy is put into place that costs small businesses more money and hurts them. Well, we're not advocating for that. We're advocating for making reuse profitable. So that's the but. The rose, well, let's go with the thorn next.
Yeah. Tell me what your problems that you're facing.
Yeah, the
Scalability
thorn
is one of them that you've mentioned.
Say that again. The
Scalability has been one of the challenges you've had, right?
Yeah, that, and we have endured plenty of those, and essentially leaving behind a model that we spent years to build and to establish an audience for, and we actually, we got sales, we did that, we had a team. Our team diminished now to what we call the tiny but mighty team that we have now. But we are now flourishing, and that's going to be the rose here. But
perfect.
But the thorns are the scalability has been a challenge. COVID was a challenge. The current confusion in the economic world is a challenge, and people are less likely to act on things that they need to spend money in a city or county budget when they don't know where the next round of funding is going to come from. So those are challenges. But the real rose, and I kind of get choked up talking about this because the people, the network that we've built, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of people that help us to do what we need to do by the goodness of their heart. And they're so generous, and they are so helpful, and they spend so much time and energy, and they devote that to what we're doing because they believe in us and they believe in what we're doing and that it will be good for generations to come. So that is the rose. It smells good, it looks good, and it's just an amazing aspect of having built relationships and a network and nurturing it for years to where these beautiful relationships blossom and can come to fruition. So that's.
Well, Larry, and you've mentioned you want to live to 120 years, which is wild, but the fact that these systems will live on beyond us is something even more amazing, that you're changing the market on its face. You're changing its structure and the way it works. And my hope is that it far outlasts all of us here. This is amazing work.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
So last few questions on our community garden here. We're planting some seeds of hope, actually. Tell me what an actionable tip, trick, or technique is that you've shared with folks in your work. A seed, wildflowers or sunflowers that you can give away.
Interesting. So a tip that I've given away in our work there, you kind of...
You've mentioned one here, even at the top of this conversation is, and kind of sprinkled through here is when we're throwing things into that Goodwill box or into the can, that there's some thoughtfulness and mindfulness that we should install right there in that decision process.
Right. So look at things with a wider use lens, if you will. So here's one. So dog leashes. We've had dogs for years. We don't currently have one, but we've had many. So we got a box of dog leashes. Well, dog leashes are made of very strong nylon webbing. I've used that. I've gone down to the local hardware store and gotten some fasteners and such that you would use in camping situation or backpacking and cut that, burn the end of it, and made things that work in my gym that I didn't have to pay for other than a little piece or two from the hardware store. But, you're spending $80 for a thing in the gym. I got a piece of rope and some parts that I put together that with that very strong webbing that I otherwise would have just left in a box or thrown away and made something new out of it. So I guess, saving the plastic peanut butter jars, that's oh, geez, why would I do that? And well, actually, they're clear, they're safe, they're cheap, they're nothing, but we don't throw them away. We use them for other stuff, and then they become jars to send stuff home when you have leftovers or something.
Or gather fasteners in your Home Depot down in
or they're fasteners in the Home Depot. So look with a lens of what might somebody else use this for, rather than just casually throwing it away.
Mm.
And I do that also in the professional world too, asking people to consider what the next life of a building would be, because oftentimes we look at a building and we think, oh, well, it's just time to go. We got to knock it down and put up something new and special and sparkly. And yet, if you do adaptive reuse is using the existing building as stands and making it better than it is.
Like transforming its use into something else?
Transforming its use into something else. And
okay.
when I went to a high school reunion, and my grade school had been made into condominiums, like it's a beautiful old brick building. Well, now that beautiful old brick building with its tall windows and all that had been made into really nice condominiums. So there's one use of it. They didn't have to knock it down, throw it away, and then put up a new sort of a blander version. They got to maintain the history of it. They got to maintain the beautiful aesthetic of it, and they got to make a very enjoyable place for people to live.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way to think about it. And you don't always have to go new. You can revive, re-energize, rejuvenate things. So that's what that's.
And speaking of reviving and rejuvenating, the last question here in our community garden is about gardeners. Who people have inspired your work and been inspiring to you along your way?
Wow. Well, I got quite a list of entrepreneurs who inspire me. They include Jeff Bezos, because he made the biggest marketplace in the world, and Sarah Blakely, because she's just an amazing human being, and she just is so positive and works through things so well. And Darren Hardy is an entrepreneur. He's an author. He was the publisher of Success Magazine, and I've taken many of his courses. And he has a thing called Darren Daily that I listen to 5 mornings a week for 5 to 6 minutes a day, just to give you that kind of an emotional, intellectual charge that gets that score. And so those are some of them that I don't actually know personally. And then personally, I have some amazing people around us. I mean, our internal team. Ann Wendell is our researcher and writer extraordinaire, and she is just a gem to have on our team. My sister is our current administrator, and we've had quite a large team over the years, up to I think 10 at a time. But like I said, it diminished, but now we're mighty. But we're mighty because of the people in the next circle around us that aren't actually part of the company, but they're contracted with us. Like one of our technology partners is iWaste Not Systems up outside of Toronto in Canada. The Green Mission, run by and owned by Jessica Marshall out on the East Coast, and they do salvage assessments, appraisals of buildings, so you can value the materials in the building while it's still standing before you take it down. Our attorney and who does a lot of work for us, it just comes out of the generousness of his heart, and we've got another gentleman named Michael Hartzell, who is our HubSpot expert and a marketing help, and he just surprises me. He'll be tinkering in our HubSpot, or he'll put up a new web page for us, or make a new little video just out of the goodness of his heart. And there are more, and I apologize for not mentioning everybody, but we don't have time for that, because the list is very long.
Right.
But I'm grateful for all of them.
There's so much heart in this conversation. Thanks for bringing it here. Okay, last question with gardeners. Who are you helping to grow? Who are in your the cast of your light that you're helping to sprout and really turn it strong?
Well, I have 2 accountability partners, actually 3 now. And it's sort of a mutual mentorship advisory on back and forth with all 3 of them.
Mentorship's the two-way street.
One is a technologist who's deep into the world of AI, and she's an author, and we just challenge each other, and we hold each other accountable on certain aspects of life. And then another is literally a rocket scientist, and she has a medical device company. She got her first patent, I think, like 13 years ago. Talk about taking a long time to get to market. Well, they do. And she's brilliant. She was introduced to me as the smartest person in any room you're ever going to be in.
Yeah.
Well, okay, like that's great for me, but not so great for you. But I get to help her with some of the business aspects that she didn't have quite so strongly. And she has said that, the goal setting and the structuring of our accountability has helped her immensely to get greater clarity and purpose and strength moving forward. So there's that. And then I've over time, I have quite a number of people that I mentor from a distance. A young woman on the East Coast, a young man in California, just people that I appreciate who they are, and I get to help them through various aspects of their careers. I do job hunt and career planning. I've done that as a side for over 30 years, and so I still can't seem to get out of doing that. And that's sort of my pay it forward channel, because the job hunt world is such a grueling, inhuman machine now that I help people to actually keep it down at the human level.
Love that. I'm on the hunt, so I'll be reaching out to
we're
you.
Going to talk. Yeah.
Well, so I want to close our episode with a little grounding in nature. We share some of the bounty of the Pacific Northwest here.
We do.
Not limiting you to this map, this place on the map. Where is one of your favorite places in nature, Larry?
Wow. Well, it's actually a little more general than that.
That's fine.
I find my greatest peace in the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
I've jumped into nearly frozen streams with snow and ice all around them and jumped into pools. I've sat and fished beside lakes that, nobody's at for, that you had to get through the brambles and the thickets. We live in an area that we get to look out at the mountains or bluffs from 4 directions of our house. We're right next to the Columbia River and the confluence of that and the Wenatchee River. And it's just breathtaking, and it's calming. And in the winters, it's gorgeous. And like I told you earlier, I used to be a skier. I don't now because I'm just too dang responsible after several injuries. But I long for it, and we can look out our kitchen windows and see the sparkly lights of the ski resort out there in the distance, and it still calls me. So I'm really kind of I love the mountains kind of guy.
I don't get used to how pretty it is here in the North.
Yeah.
So much different types of topography and environments, and high desert to temperate rainforest to Canada to Portland. Boy, you can be so many amazing places here in this corner of the map. Well, today's conversation has been fantastic, Larry. I've really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much for joining me here on the episode of Net Podsitive. You've given us some really great tips for material reuse, that it's not just good for the planet, that it's a viable business model. You've shown that proof in the pudding. Thanks so much for sharing some of the inner workings there of your business. You've given us a glimpse into the future with technology and how that's accelerating the transition to circularity and material reuse. And you've given us some strategies that businesses are using to really accelerate that marketplace. And then as well, you've given us tips and tricks for individuals and businesses that can take small steps to be part of this big change.
Yeah.
Are any closing thoughts before we break?
Well, I'm very grateful you had me on here, Richard. I appreciate it. I love the name Net Podsitive.
Oh, thank you. I love a good dad joke or pun in there.
Play on words, and being one who appreciates puns, I appreciated that. So it's been delightful. And, you and I have just been getting to know each other, and we spent some time together, and that's been a real bonus too. And I look forward to when we do get to cross paths, because we're not that far away.
We're not.
And that'll be fun. So I look forward to that. So
Me too, Larry. It's nice that we get to work with our friends. That makes it even more important and special.
Yeah.
I hopefully can count on you as friend in our conversations here.
I appreciate that. And likewise, may I count on you as the same.
Please do. Please do. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us here for another episode of Net Positive with Larry LaMotte. We've gotten to learn lots of interesting information, new resources. Please connect with Larry, and I'll drop some information with connection and resources, links to various things that we've talked about in today's conversation. You'll be able to find out more. And remember that big changes start small. And we'll see you again on our next episode.
Okay. Thanks, Richard.